Right, my name's Mike Welton. I've been in Easington virtually all my life. Parents are here as before, and my grandparents have lived here for a while. So I've been here most of my life, as I say. Always had interest in history, collect things, collect information, photographs. I since joined this group Skeels in the village some 6 years ago. We started in 2006. We're a group of people who look into history, get books published. I'm now the chair of it now, so we are doing quite well already. It's quite interesting. Keeps my taste buds going.
So, just going on to a few specific things. I guess the first thing I want to talk about is the coastal change. Now, how have you seen this area change in the time that you've been here, particularly the sort of coastal area?
Well, obviously, I mean, it's renowned as this coast, the Holderness Coast. It's boulder clay, and it's quite rapidly disappearing. But in my lifetime, I mean, I've seen it going, but you just accept it as normal. I mean, I think because there's nobody really lost any houses as such. It hasn't been a personal thing. There's still quite a way to go. I mean, the caravan sites there, they're given a rollback, but individuals, not in Easington, perhaps further up the coast, there are people who've lost houses, which is obviously more striking for them. But in this area, we sort of just accept the fact it goes. I mean, you can go for 2 or 3 years and nothing, and then a huge swathe of land will go. It's quite predictable and depends on the tide, really.
Now, you on Saturday showed me a remarkable collection of photographs about Spurn Head.
Yeah,
and that's something that I haven't. Nobody's really talked to me about, but you obviously know a lot about it. It's difficult to say. Tell me everything about Spurn Head, because that's a huge question, isn't it? But in particular, concern with coastal erosion. How has that changed over the years, and how has if you just talk me through some of the ways that Spurn Head has been used and who's inhabited it. You talked about the various coast guards and the army and various things. If you could give me a potted history as
well, I mean, Spurn's been there for centuries. It's always been a changing coastline. I mean, Spurn itself is always moving westerly. It erodes on the seaside and builds up on the Humber side. There's been in the past Ravensir Odd, which had that particular town had an MP, had a weekly fair. It was quite a big, important place, really. But again, that washed away in about 1350. So there's been habitation down there for many centuries. It's always been vulnerable because, if you probably see from maps how thin it is. During the First World War, with it being exposed to the East North Sea and the German possible occupation, decided to put munitions and things there and armaments. And because it was basically all sand and gravel, it was easier to bring materials down to the Spurn by boat. Then they built a railway line from the peninsula, the end of the peninsula, back to Kilnsea. There was a fort at Spurn called the Green Battery, and then there was a single railway line back to Kilnsea, which was a place called Fort Godwin. This was used throughout the First World War. It was put in care and maintenance after the war, and of course Second World War came along and it was remanned up and bigger guns and everything else. And they did a lot of maintenance regards to coastal erosion. They put groins in. They also put a concrete road in 1940, which made things a lot easier. It was still in care and maintenance through to the 50s, and the MOD decided they would get rid of it. From then on, really, it was starting to deteriorate because the Yorkshire Wildlife Trust, they own it. They bought it in 1959. Also, there was the Coast Guards, there was the RNLI, and the Humber Pilots all had bases down there, and they contributed to keeping the place, the coastline, maintained. But it's been breached a number of times, and it's been getting worse and worse. And this last few years, it's sort of breached 3 or 4 times a year. I mean, and they're doing nothing to it. All they do is they have a road which have made of interlocking bricks, which they lay on the west side, on the Humber side. But again, these are just getting washed away, and it's I think inevitably it's going, because in fact in 1850 it was a series of islands of sperm. It did break through, in fact, and the government did put a lot of money into restoring it because it was of vital importance, and also it could affect the navigational channels in the Humber, because at the moment it's sort of a curvature and it stops the sand going into the Humber, because it's quite. I mean, the changing sandbanks in the Humber is a constant threat. That's why you have your pilots there for taking vessels up and down the Humber. So it was important in that respect. And if it goes through again, I mean, I'm quite sure it'll change a lot at the Humber, you know. But they don't seem to be bothered.
I guess there's less of an imperative, certainly from a defence type of view, and also I guess it's cost in the end of it.
Exactly, yeah.
Isn't it?
Yeah.
So can you tell me something about the sort of the life of the lighthouses? Because it changed quite a bit, didn't it, of having sort of permanent lighthouse and Coast Guard stuff there, and there was a school and all sorts of things.
I mean, there's been lighthouse there for centuries again. A chap called Smeaton, he built one in give me tracks right here. There's one built in about 1770 odd, but unfortunately they used wooden piles for the base, so that was obviously asking for trouble. And in 1891 the cracks started appearing in the lighthouse, so they built another one just alongside it. This was built in it was finished in 1895, and it ran from then till 1985, I think it was, and it shut down as such then, because they had sat navs and satellite navigation for ships, and there wasn't the need so much for it, you know. But I mean, it's a complete community down there. I mean, the lighthouses had lighthouse keepers, which lived around in a compound around the lighthouse. Then it was Trinity House had it, but things improved over the years, and they had first they had oil lighthouse, and then it was during the war they had electricity, which the army supplied with generators, because that way they could give, if any activity was on the go, they could just do small signals with the lighthouse with electricity on and off, as opposed to having it going all the time, which would give German bombers, particularly, or aircraft, indication of where things were. But then, after the army left, they put acetylene gas in, and it was on sort of an automatic thing. Although the lifeboat people down there, they had a sort of a contract, because with a lighthouse, the prism in the glass works both ways. So believe it or not, they had to shut the curtains during the day, otherwise the sun could burn the mantle out. And at night time, they had to open the curtains so the lighthouse could be seen. So that was sort of a permanent job they had with keeping, you know, maintaining them, you know. So then it closed down in 85. So then it became sort of redundant. All the stuff was taken out. It's just been left there. At the moment there is a scheme on to get some, trying to get some lottery money to refurbish it, because it's quite a structure. It must have been quite a place, you know. Again, with coastal erosion, the lighthouse, the lifeboat people. Now they were there first established in 1810 by Trinity House. Then the Humber Conservancy Board took over in 1911, and then the R&I took over in 1913, and they are to this present day. And the families always lived down there. There's been a number of cottages built for the families, for them to reside in. But just recently, last year in fact, because of the erosion, it was getting quite impractical to live down there for the families. I mean, the lifeboat lads are there quite happy there, and so the R&I, in their wisdom, decided to remove the families because the kids couldn't get to school, shopping was awkward, so they've been moved to wherever they want to live. But the lifeboat crew themselves reside down there on a sort of 6 on 6 off shift basis, so they can still maintain lifeboats, because Spurn is still the ideal place to launch a lifeboat. You've got a 3 mile start because of the way the peninsula goes out. You've got a 3 mile start in a sense. If you had the boat at Grimsby, which has been recommended, well, they've been suggested, but you can get locked in there if the tides are wrong, if the dock gates are shut, so they have to be outside the gates all the time, you know. So really Spurn is the best place, really. It's ideally placed.
So what's the future of Spurn if nothing's done, do you think? What's going to happen in the next, I don't know, 10, 20 years?
Well, the way it's eroding, I mean, I say at the moment that the Coast Guard, not the Coast Guard, the R&I and the Humber pilots, they spend money on trying to maintain the road, but it must get to a point where it's just not going to be practical, and it's going to be impossible, because I mean it's wearing pretty thin is the road now. It's in places there isn't a road really. It's just the sea washes over, in big tides.
And in the past, there was an issue with the gravel boats. Could you explain what they were, what they did, and what effect they may have or may not have had on things?
I think it's been a bone of contention. I mean, back in the 1800s, late 1800s, the gravel barges would come round. And there's a place just off the east coast, the east of Spurn, called the Binks, which is a large gravelled area. And the boats would come round, anchor over it at high tide, wait till the tide went down. They would settle on the gravel. They would barrow the gravel into the vessels, and then float off on a high tide, and it would be sold. This went on for years, and I mean, there's even gravel going on now, but it's further. I think it's further out now. It's not so much, but there's always been this thing that by taking gravel, it could prove or disprove. I don't know, but it could have an adverse effect on the coastline, because it's taking stuff away.
Do you think there's anything that can be done along the coastline or some of the coastline to,
well, the thing is,
change it?
In years ago, a grand system which always seemed to work, and it was simple, and that was groins, where you drive piles into the beach. You have planks, and then you have to know what they're doing. The gravel and sand builds up because you get a longshore drift with the tides, which carries sand along, and these groins catch the sand as such and build up the beach, and so the tide doesn't hit the cliff. It loses energy on the sand further out, and the boards will be taken out and from time to time, and they maintain the beach level. The only thing is, you've got to have when that happens, you've got to have the groins right up to the cliff face, because if it gets behind it'll erode around it. But nowadays, I mean, this is an old-fashioned idea, but it worked. Nowadays, they all believe in concrete walls and great expense, but with groins, you work with the tide, and not just.
But the concrete walls, they're only in two places between.
That's right, yeah.
Between Hornsey and Withensea, really, isn't it?
I mean, even here we've got the rock revetment, which is to protect the gas sites. It's lumps of granite from Norway, which does help. In a sense, it's going back to the old groin system. In a sense, it's just letting sand build. It takes the force out of the waves, and it lets sand build up, which again stops the tide reaching, so it isn't hitting it head on. It's losing its power further out. I mean, there's been talk of using reefs of tyres and cars and all sorts, which possibly could work. I mean, it's worth a try, I think, but
it's a matter of having the political will
and
to do it, isn't it?
I mean, nowadays with environment and everything, they say that rubber would pollute, and I think I don't know.
So do you think it has an effect on communities? What effect, should I say, do you think it has on communities?
It has to some extent. I mean, there used to be not a big fishing industry in the village, but there were fishermen, as there are now. A little more a hobby than commercial. But I mean, obviously, it is having some effect. I mean, the Coast Guards were here for some number of years. They've moved on because of improvements in communication and satellite things and so on. So we don't need them so much. The lifeboat is still maintained at Spurn, as I say.
What about the fishing industry I know there's a lot in Hull, but there was some, or is some, still in Withensea?
There are some fishermen there, yes.
Do you know what the history of the fishing in the area? Do you know much about that? Is that a particular area that you've studied at all?
I mean, I studied fishing myself. The three of us had a boat, but it was just purely for enjoyment.
But what about commercial fishing in the area?
I wouldn't say. I mean, they get people from Scarborough and Brid used to come down, fishing and crabbing as well. They're on a more commercial basis, but locally it's been just local people. So
there's no. I mean, I guess Scarborough and Brid were the main places where the fish really, landed,
that's right,
because they've got proper harbours.
That's right, yeah.
Whereas there aren't any between Bridlington and Hull. There aren't any.
Not really, no.
Harbours as such.
Not harbours, no.
Because they were the sort of the cobble boats that launched on the beaches.
And they were designed to land on the beach. They were built that way for landing on the beach, which is the easiest way to bring it to shore.
But that's long since gone. Isn't
that's
it?
right, yeah, that is, yeah.
Very long time.
And I mean, Hull itself it used to be the second or third biggest fishing community in the country, and that's all gone now. with Iceland and fishing quotas. And
I know you've written a book about the Coast Guard in Easington. The lifeboat in Easington.
Yes.
Can you tell me a little bit about that? What it used to do, why it was here, why it's gone? Any particular stories?
There was a lifeboat based at Withensea, and they built the lighthouse in 1890s, which then gave because the lighthouse at Withensea is inland, because there's a number of ships getting wrecked there. So they built a lighthouse which stopped a lot of ships coming ashore, and also they built groins, and this made it dangerous to launch the lifeboat at certain states of the tide. So he decided to move it to Easington, and it was brought by road and horses in 1913, called the Dosia Chapman, and it was based at Easington here till 1933. It rescued 28 lives altogether, I think it was, manned by fishermen, and then the Spurn lifeboats have been there since 1810, as I said before, but they got a motorised lifeboat, which made the area far bigger range for the lifeboat to cover. So they decided there was no need because the Easington lifeboat was a pulling and sailing lifeboat. So they decided that they would dismantle the station. And
how did the lifeboat cope with the changing coastline? Was it sort of below the coastline, or how did they operate that?
Well, initially, when the boat first came here, they had it perched on the cliff. They had a slipway dug, and then in 1915 they built a lifeboat shed. It was quite some way back from the cliff at the time, but I mean now the whole thing's gone. Now the whole lifeboat shed, everything's gone. They just kept moving back as we do to this day, really, and just keep go with the flow.
Yeah, literally.
Literally, yeah.
Literally. So it's just like you said, it's just what happens. People just
accept it. Yeah, that's it. Yeah, it always has done and always will do. I think you won't stop it. Is a fact. But
I think you've covered everything that I've got a list of. But is there anything else that you want to share with me, or? Because obviously, we talked for years on Saturday, but if there's anything particular you think I ought to be knowing about, I mean, my main focus is how coastal changes has affected people, and about fishing as well. But I mean, we've covered that, I think. But it's just the coastal aspect.
I mean, the road. I mean, I remember the road. It's been moved back 3 times in places on the cliff. At Dimlington, it's obviously, I mean, the high cliffs there, and what tends to happen there is you get tend to get there with doing high cliffs. It doesn't just break off; it slumps. You get a big section will crack, and it'll just slide down the cliff. I've got a picture somewhere of a complete pond in a piece of land that's just slid down the cliff. It's and again, it depends on. It doesn't always happen all the time, because I mean, sometimes it can be put down to tidal effect. Sometimes it can be very dry summer, and the land tends to crack. Sometimes it can be very wet. It can be very wet, and the land drains cause the water to. And so it's a combination of.
So it seems to be whatever the weather, something's going to get it wet,
go,
dry, or whatever.
Yeah. And sometimes you get boulder clay. Sometimes you get areas of sort of soft sand, and that goes quite rapidly, obviously. But so it's.
Because I was I sort of in my mind imagined whole areas of cliff just falling away in a big dramatic.
Not as such, no. It's just a gradual nibble, really, and I say occasionally at Dimlington it slides down. But it's. I mean, I think they said that the Romans were here, and I think they estimated the cliff edge was between 1.5 and 2 miles from its present position. So it's been happening a long time, and so you won't stop it, I'm afraid.
Well, considering it's in the life of the earth, it's a very temporary little bit of mud, isn't it?
That's right. Yeah.
That you're living on.
Yes, really. I mean, half hour. I think really Holland should give us some money back, because they've got half our land. I think Purell washes down there and builds up on their coast. So start paying us
with the EU,
paying us revenue.
That's wonderful. That's excellent. That's really good.